Hi and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave and this is episode 1326B, and today's date is July 7th, 2017, and the title of the episode is, If Congress Passes This Amendment, It Will Change Everything. Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, as we know, Robert Mueller, he is heading up the independent investigation into the Russian hacking, the Russian collusion, and we can see at this point everything from Comey and from the Senate panel. They can't find any evidence of any of this, but they still have Robert Mueller in there doing an investigation. Now, Robert Mueller wanted to look at the DNC servers, but the DNC is refusing to let them look at the servers. Now, they also refused the FBI, they refused the Department of Homeland Security, and they only let one company look at the servers, and that was CrowdStrike. This is the only organization that was allowed to inspect the DNC servers, and they said, yes, it was a Russian hack. Now, of course, they provided no proof whatsoever. They said, just believe us. And no police force, no investigative body ever looked into this. Now, all of which brings us back to our original question. If the DNC is in possession of actual tangible evidence that could prove once and for all that Russians hacked their servers and attempted to undermine the campaign of Hillary Clinton, why not share the evidence with the investigators? Because wouldn't this just clear everything up? Well, because, first of all, it never happened. Second of all, there's information on the servers they don't want leaked out. Because once these investigators see into their servers and see the data, well, there's going to be a lot more questions. Now, maybe this has to do with when the Clintons and Loretta Lynch met on the Phoenix tarmac, where, they said, listen, we're not going to really look into what is going on with the emails. We're not going to be looking into the servers. We're not going to be looking into anything. And we're going to give you assurances that the FBI investigation is going to be not an investigation, but a matter. Maybe that's all coincidental. Because when you start adding all these things up, where there was this meeting, Loretta Lynch put pressure on the FBI and told the FBI not to investigate, and no one is allowed to look at the DNC servers except this one company. The FBI can't look at it. DHS can't look at it. Police can't look at it. The independent investigator can't look at it. Well, you have to think something is definitely going on here. Now, out in Germany, we understand that the G20 summit, well, it was kicked off. It's happening in Hamburg, and there are protesters out there. The police have been deployed, and we can see that there are riots. There are some fires that are going on there, and things are getting a little rowdy, out of hand. But we see at this point that Trump met with Putin, and they did have a handshake. They really didn't do it in front of the press. They did it in private, but someone did snap a picture of them actually shaking hands, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, this is what the corporate media is worrying about. And Trump and Putin, they spent around 2+ hours meeting with each other. It was only supposed to last around 30 to 40 minutes, but they had a lot to discuss, as we know. And they had a very lengthy conversation. Trump said it went very well. Putin was very happy with the conversation. They talked about terrorism. They talked about the Russian hacking, and Putin assured him that no, Russia did not hack the election or the DNC. And we can see that Trump actually went and asked the question, which is kind of meaningless. It doesn't really matter because they have no proof whatsoever. So it's at this point, it's really meaningless. And they talked about Syria. They talked about North Korea. They talked about all the issues. And we're going to discuss this a little bit later in the report. But Trump was out there and he tweeted that there was a lot to discuss with Putin. And he said the fake news media will never cover me accurately on the discussion with Putin. So it really doesn't matter. And most of what they're discussing is behind the scenes. And we can see that there are other plans in motion right now. Now, what's very interesting is that there's 129 nations set to approve a nuclear weapons ban. And they're preparing to sign a global ban on nuclear weapons. This is the first ever such treaty and the first multilateral nuclear disarmament treaty in more than 20 years. Unfortunately, well, it's not going to happen. That's because every single nuclear weapon nation on the planet has boycotted the effort. I mean, this is unbelievable. Along with NATO and all the other countries, except for the Netherlands. But all the other countries are saying, yeah, we're not doing this whatsoever. The United States has been particularly outspoken in its opposition of the plan, saying that it was not realistic and that the U.S. doesn't trust the other nuclear powers to disarm if a deal was reached. Now, why don't we just try? Why don't we just get together and try to work this out? But look, nobody wants to even try. It's amazing. Out in the Philippines, we see the Philippine authorities, they announced that they found the individual, the suspect, who is the financier of the Islamic State terrorists and who organized the Islamic State in the country. And it was a woman. Her name, Mona Lisa Ramado. She is the niece of the matriarch of the Malt clan. And it looks like she's been setting this up. She's been funding it. And it looks like they caught her. Now, who was she dealing with to allow them in there? What intelligence agency was she dealing with to set this all up? And where was the funding coming from? That's the bigger question. Because, you know, it wasn't just her alone. It was someone else. Another group, maybe CIA, maybe Mossad, maybe MI6. We see out in Japan, they have deployed a joint air-to-surface standoff missiles towards North Korea in readiness of a strike from North Korea. And we can see that they're preparing with F-16s, the Japanese F-35s, and they're flying them around and showing force. And we can see this is what South Korea is doing. We see this is what Japan is doing. And it looks like they're just saber-rattling, saying, listen, if you try anything, we can get you. Now, again, North Korea is not going to try anything at this point. Actually, General Mattis is out there saying, listen, the United States is still focused on a diplomatic effort to stop North Korea's developing their nuclear program. He says, even though it doesn't look like it, we're still working with diplomacy. It has not failed. Now, what's very interesting about that statement and the next one that we're going to discuss is that China and Russia, they proposed a plan to deal with North Korea. Now, Trump was working with China to try to calm the situation down in North Korea. Now, before Trump became president, we know that the administration was also working with China saying, listen, China has to resolve this issue. And we see that China and Russia, well, they're working together. They developed this plan. Now, Trump didn't come out and say, listen, this is great. We should get Russia involved, because the corporate media would have gone crazy over this. So Trump was meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, President Moon Jae-in. They were meeting at the G20 summit in Hamburg. And the three leaders issued a joint statement on the serious and escalating threat posed by the nuclear and ballistic missile programs of North Korea. Trump, Abe, and Moon called for other nations to reduce their economic relations with North Korea and asked nations that border North Korea to make further efforts to convince the North Korean regime to abandon its current threatening and provocative path and immediately take steps to denuclearize and halt its ballistic missile program. Well, let's say, what countries border North Korea? Well, South Korea, we know. It's China and Russia. So in a roundabout way, Trump, Abe, and Moon are telling Russia and China, move forward with what you're about to do and use your multi-step plan to work with North Korea. This is what we are seeing right now. This was part of the meeting with Putin. Now, we can see that out in Syria, the Syrian army is set to recapture oil fields near Palmyra from the Islamic State. And we can see that they have encircled the terrace in Al-Hal oil field near the ancient city of Palmyra. Army units are currently less than a mile away from this oil field. They're closing in on the Islamic State from the west, the south, and the southeast. And they also recaptured the Ark oil field some 25 miles northeast of Palmyra. That was last month. And you can see that they're continually pushing the Islamic State out, and they're recapturing these oil fields. Now, Russia and Syria, they are saying, listen, we want the United States, we want the UN, the OPCW, to come and take a look at the Shayrat airbase. We want you to examine the base for sarin gas. And they're saying if the U.S. partners are really confident about this, they should grab at the chance to visit the facility to obtain evidence showing that Damascus is guilty of violating the convention and to prevent the use of poisonous gases. But the United States continues to refuse to do this. So what does this tell us? This tells us if they actually go to the airbase. Remember, the OPCW never visited the airbase. They just took the terrorists' word that this was happening there. If the United States, the OPCW, and other nations go to this airbase and they do an investigation, you know what they're going to find? No sarin gas. This is why they don't want to visit it. This is why they don't want an investigation. Almost like the DNC hacking. Well, we can't let the FBI, DHS, or anyone else look at the servers. You'll have to believe us. Well, without an investigation, why should we believe? Wouldn't we want to investigate to prove that Assad has done this? Well, we already know that he didn't. They already know that they didn't. So this is why they'll never, ever going to go to the base. They'll never do an investigation. They're never going to do any of this. Now, it looks like Trump and Putin, Lavrov, Tillerson, they reached a ceasefire deal in southwest Syria. They came together at the G20 summit, and they worked this whole thing out. And right now, there is a ceasefire deal. Now, yes, we've had ceasefire deals before. The United States broke them, and we'll have to see how this one plays out. Now, what's very interesting is that the U.S. House Appropriations Committee unanimously passed an amendment that would, if passed by the full Congress, repeal, after an 8-month delay, the authorization for the use of military force. And that was passed, if you remember, back in September. That's September 11th, 2001. And it's been used ever since for the justification for wars in each and every one of these countries. Now, if Congress goes ahead and de-authorizes this legislation, the deep state, they would be in a huge amount of trouble. The wars that we see across the Middle East would have to come to an end. And this would be a huge problem. For who? Not the people of the United States. It would be a huge problem for those individuals that are spreading war across the globe, who are empire building. Now, the AUMF violated the intention of the authors of the U.S. Constitution, which was to require that Congress vote before any war could begin, as well as that Congress raise and fund an army for no more than a 2-year period without voting to appropriate more funding. Now, the AUMF, that completely bypasses all of this. And they've been using this outdated legislation to go into each and every one of these countries, and almost nobody is calling them out on this. So once again, the laws within our government are completely different for them than for the people. If they decide this is what we're going to do, it doesn't matter what the Constitution says. It doesn't matter what anyone else says. We're going to do it. And remember, by creating these laws, it doesn't override the Constitution. They can pretend it does. They can say it does, but it doesn't. And basically what they're doing is they're just violating all of this. And this is why if Congress can do this one little thing and pass this, well, it would change everything. Now, once again, we know the deep state, they don't want this to happen because their mission is to empire build, destroy lives, destroy countries, steal their assets, because this is what they've been doing all along, and they want to continue. They don't want it to end. But for once, if Congress can just look at this and say, you know something, we need to end this. The people don't want this anymore. This is in violation of the Constitution. We need to de-authorize it. I mean, the U.S. House Appropriations Committee, they passed the amendment. And they said, yeah, we need to do this. I mean, just think about what would happen. The troops in all these countries, they'd have to be recalled. We would not be allowed to be in any of these countries waging war. In Syria, troops would have to be moved out of that area because they're using this to say, this is why we're in there. We're fighting terrorism. This is why we're in Iraq. This is why we're in Libya. This is why we're in Somalia. This is why we're in Lebanon. This is why we're in Yemen. The troops would have to be recalled. We wouldn't be able to use drones on Al-Qaeda or Al-Sham or the Islamic State, which this is not what we're really using drones for. We're using drones on the people who don't support the puppet government that the deep state put into place. So what we need to do at this point, we need to force Congress to de-authorize the use of military force. So every single person should be calling their senator, calling their congressman, saying, we need to do this. No more war. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.